Well, as a B-movie, it's passable. Barely. But that's about it. Servus Freunde, my name's Jimmy Cage, and Skyscraper wasn't the big fun summer blockbuster I was hoping it to be. Unfortunately, this was almost absolute trash that's only saved by Dwayne Johnson, who is always giving his best. And there are some neat vertigo-inducing moments as well. The film was written and directed by Rawson Thurber, who is more known for his comedic work like Dodgeball or We're the Millers. Though his last film, Central Intelligence, also starring Dwayne Johnson, had a lot of action in it, but it was still mostly a comedy. Now, apart from a few instances and a lot of unintentional humor, I guess, Skyscraper has a much more serious note to it, while also being completely ridiculous. It tries to be more of a straight action movie, always trapped or comfortably set in the tropes of the genre, and therefore already this utterly escapist entertainment, but it's not playful or charming at all, which is a shame because I think some well-needed humor injected into this rather dull affair might have changed it quite a bit. This year we celebrate the 30th anniversary of one of the best, if not the best action movie ever made, John McTiernan's Die Hard, starring the great Bruce Willis at a time when he still cared about being in a movie. Now, it's no big secret that Skyscraper pays homage to that film. They even made a Die Hard poster for it. If you want to be more critical, you could call it a blatant rip-off. When we look back at the past, it was very common practice through pretty much all decades of cinema that the formula of great films got copied, sometimes beat by beat. It was often done by other nations as well to adapt a working concept for their audience. Skyscraper comes across as exactly that. A cheap attempt to copy Die Hard, but in the progress forgetting everything that made Die Hard so great. Now, you might say it's rather unfair to compare this fun summer blockbuster with one of the best films ever made, but that comparison shines a pretty good light on the movie's most blatant flaws. But before I point out what didn't work, I also have to mention that this is a Chinese co-production, and even if you don't know much about modern movie making, it's pretty obvious that it was primarily made for a Chinese audience. This is a practice that's getting more common each year. Big movies cost a lot of money, and for some productions, the international market is already more important than the domestic box office. And by far the biggest international market is China. Skyscraper tells the story of Will Sawyer, played by Dwayne Johnson, a former FBI hostage rescue team leader who is now specialized in security systems. His new assignment brings him and his young family to Hong Kong, where a billionaire has built the world's tallest skyscraper. When some mysterious criminal enters the stage, the building gets caught on fire and Sawyer must try to rescue his family and save the day. John McClane's biggest handicap were probably his bare feet, which seems like peanuts compared to Will Sawyer's missing leg, but only on paper because the movie Skyscraper is yet another one of those absolute absurd, over-the-top and also brain-dead action vehicles. But unlike the best Fast and the Furious entries, this one is played way too serious for its own good. It also takes quite some time until it shows its true face. I mean, sure, everyone who has seen the trailer knows about that ludicrous jump from a construction crane, but up until that point the film is rather grounded. It already outed its cheap script, witless writing and lazy direction. It looks stale and you can anticipate every story beat and villain reveal a mile away, but so far it still portrayed Sawyer as this nervous family man with a handicap. Sure, also with the body of The Rock, but still grounded in reality. And a script writing 101 demands that missing leg isn't just a physical characteristic, but it also stands for the trauma that's connected to his last days as an FBI agent. The bare minimum I expect from a film like this is that it follows through on its own arcs, but there's barely anything here. Even Johnson's 15-year-old film The Rundown has more in that regard. In both films his characters don't want to touch a gun, and in the finale of The Rundown it's at least some obstacle for him to overcome. Skyscraper doesn't really care that much about its story and characters, but I was talking more about the movie's tone. And once we get to that big jumping scene from the trailer, it's instantly clear that this is just silly. And it's not even the jump, but the fact that Sawyer climbs up the whole crane before he's jumping. Now, when there's no tension, because your story isn't that gripping, your villain is super weak and lacks any charisma, and you have no real connection to the actual physics of our world, how do you make the audience care for what's going on? Something that worked at least to some degree was the feeling of height. And that crane scene was both the moment where I knew that this was absolute schlock, as well as the movie's best set piece. Skyscraper wants to be this big, crazy action movie, but also tell a more serious thriller story, and also never dares to leave this family-friendly PG-13 environment. Apart from very few instances, the action is just rudimentary stuff, nothing exciting and absolutely bloodless with almost zero cathartic effect. When you wish the movie and its central character might become a bit more badass, because the sentimental family angle clearly isn't working, they instantly step on the brakes. If you think there must be at least some decent one-liners in here, there aren't. I could really go on and on about every element that isn't working here, and it often comes back to the Die Hard comparison, because that's pretty much your goal with something like this. There isn't a single relationship between two or more human beings in this movie that's fleshed out and emotional enough to give you more than the bare minimum. It's not the one between Sawyer and his old buddy, whose villainous nature is clear from the get-go. It's not the one between Sawyer and a billionaire who only shares some screen time with him at the beginning and then at the very end. It's not the one between Sawyer and a local police inspector, because they don't really get to know each other at all. But it's also not the one between Sawyer's wife Sarah, played by Neve Campbell, and that police inspector, because it only stays at the absolute surface level. The one connection the movie banks on is that of Sawyer and his family, but that one is just your typical easy way out. How can we motivate our hero to save the day? By putting small innocent children in danger. They don't have any characters and the whole movie is really weakly put together. Another relationship that has no punch to it, or rather two relationships that don't have any flavor, are A. Sawyer and the weak-ass villain, and B. the rich billionaire and the weak-ass villain. Again, Hans Gruber is one of cinema's best villains and he was also played by one of cinema's best actors. But please, give your hero and villain at least some back and forth moments. Because a burning CGI building isn't really good enough as your antagonist. And that whole framing angle is underwritten as well. The whole idea that Sawyer might be the cause and the police trying to lock him up is complete nonsense, and because it's not even followed through enough, it comes across as yet another lazy story beat. You see that I'm quite angry with what I got here. I always hoped to see Dwayne Johnson in an action vehicle in the vein of old Schwarzenegger, Stallone and Willis films, but this wasn't it. He was decent in it, but the film never ever excels that really cheap B-movie level. If you can live with that, you might get some enjoyment out of it. And I will admit that I did laugh about many elements, but mostly because they were quite stupid and not in that good fun stupid way. So in German I'd say, Skyscraper ist ziemlich trashige B-Movie-Kost, die irgendwie auch noch zwischen den Stühlen steht. Der Film ist weder amüsant genug, um der übertriebenen Action gerecht zu werden, noch ist er hart, dramatisch oder spannend genug, um als mitreißender Actionfilm zu funktionieren. I give Skyscraper barely 5 out of 10. It's more like 4.7, but I don't do that. So whenever a movie gets less than 6, I give you 3 better flicks. This is really too obvious, but it must be mentioned one more time. Watch the first Die Hard. My second choice could have been The Towering Inferno, because that film is another huge inspiration for Skyscraper, but since I haven't seen it, I can't do that. Instead, I'm picking the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Total Recall. And if you know that film, one element of Skyscraper's finale will appear very familiar. Last but certainly not least, let's go with my favorite action film from Hong Kong, which might also be my favorite action film in general, John Woo's Hard Boiled. Alright, that's it like always. Comment below and let me know what you think about Skyscraper. And if you know any good action movies from Hong Kong, please tell me what's your favorite one. You can hit me up on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram simply at TheJimmyCage. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like, and make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.